Hey everybody, Gormos here with another video from the Warthunder Ground Forces beta. So this week the third wave of testers got access to the game, so a lot of new people got the chance to play the game, and you really noticed the difference. The realistic battle games got a lot fuller. But let's take a look at what is new in this version of the test server. Now there are a few minor changes since the last patch. First, we got another tank set again, not a new one though. The lower tier set we already had before the high tier set. So the Panzer II, Panzer 38T, Panzer III, E and F, and the Stug 3 for the Germans, and the T-26, PT-7, T-28, and for some reason the T-34 for the Russian tree. And in this version we have to unlock the tanks. I assume now with the third wave of testers arriving, testing the progression system will become a more important part of the test. Of course, currently we have only rank 1 and reserve tanks, so that goes pretty fast. You can unlock a new tank pretty much every game. Also, I tested the manual transmission some more, and I pretty much switched over full time to the realistic controls now. The reasons I have already stated last time, the main one being that it is just more fun and feels more real. Because I was in the process of testing the realistic controls, I was happy to see we got some of the faster low tier tanks to play with. Because one worry I had earlier was how well the fast tanks I like so much, like the PT-7, would work with manual transmission. I was worried about it a bit before I got to try it. If I could use those fast mobile cavalry tanks as effectively as before, but my worries turned out to be unjustified. Playing the PT-7 and other light tanks with realistic controls worked perfectly. Overall, I would say you get used to manual very fast. The only problem I sometimes have is that I steer in the wrong direction when switching into reverse gear, but that's just a matter of time to learn it properly. I can only recommend trying realistic tank controls when you play realistic battles. You get used to them fast and they increase the immersion and give you an edge in certain situations. Now we had one really interesting change in this version of the test. Now there are a few more planes available to fly. Rank 1 aircraft of course, like the Heinkel 112 and early Stukas for the Germans and the BB-1, SB-2 and Catalinas for the Russians. Before that we had only reserve biplanes to fly. So I took a few of the planes out to get an impression of plane versus tank combat, and I think I give you a few of my thoughts on how it is and what might need to change. All the footage from both tanks and planes are of course from realistic battle mode. I just mentioned that because you might see a vector indicator in front of an enemy plane in the footage. That was introduced to help out AAA, since they have to fire more deflection shots when defending a target than fighters have to. I don't think that is necessary, but I always like deflection shooting. Anyway, it's in for now, and because it is a test you can see this vector indicator from aircraft as well. Don't confuse it with an arcade Leam aim point, that's not what it is, and if you try to use it like one you will most likely miss. Now, since I play realistic battles, my opinion on ground versus air balance is based on that. From what I have seen from arcade, I would say that plane versus tank balance works a lot better in realistic battles than it does in arcade, but I will talk a bit more about those differences later. Now, I am going to split this into two topics, strafing with cannons and bombing. So let's start with strafing runs. I wanted to get a better picture of how planes with heavy cannons will play versus tanks. Attackers like the IL-2 or the Stuka G, but also some fighters like the Era Cobra would be good for this. Right now we don't really have planes in the lineup with real good tank busting capabilities, so I substituted the Heinkel 112. The 112A0 has a pretty good cannon, a 20mm high velocity gun, more or less an aircraft version of the Panzer II's KWK-30, with a pretty decent armor piercing capability for a 20mm gun and a large ammo supply, but a rather low rate of fire. The 112B I'm flying here on the other hand has two 20mm MGFF cannons. Those have a lot lower muzzle velocity and far less armor penetrating capability and only 60 rounds per gun, but a good rate of fire. Now the MGFF are of course rather bad weapons to fire at a tank, but I was mostly testing how ground strafing was working and I hoped I might be able to get a good hit through the thin roof armor of a tank. Overall, the A0 version is better for attacking tanks, since it has enough penetration to have a good chance of penetrating the side armor of lower tier tanks. It's hard to tell how much damage you actually do, since you don't get the damage indicator you get when driving a tank. You know you did some damage when you get points, but you don't know what. I managed to get a few kill assists, especially with the A0, so I think I did some damage, but no kill. I have to say though that in the last few patches the damage model in both arcade and realistic battles got a lot more forgiving and bullet spongy, a change that I'm not very happy with, by the way. And the majority of the realistic battle players are not. I expect this to change back in realistic battles eventually. Anyway, with the old damage model from a few patches ago, a few of my attack runs with the A0 might have given me kills. But the 112 is not a perfect ground attack in any case, and as I said, I wanted to mostly get a feeling for how IL-2s and Era Cobras in the ground attack role might play. I have to say, before those planes were available, we only had a few biplanes, and I was a bit concerned because they had such an easy time of firing long and accurate bursts at tanks. Of course, they did not do anything with their machine guns, but I wondered what would happen when we get better armed planes. But of course, the biplane has such an easy time hitting because they fly very slow and are very agile. In comparison, you don't have much time to aim properly when attacking in the HE-112, and you only get a short burst most of the time before you have to break off. Also, it is not always easy to spot enemy tanks in time. Tanks are not often highlighted, and I am not entirely sure as of yet when they are. I guess it is when a friendly light tank is spotting them. So most of the time you have to look out for tracers and smoke to find tanks, and you will be pretty close by the time you see them well enough to fire. Light and weather conditions also play a role when it comes to spotting tanks. The tank part of the Ash River map, for example, is on one side surrounded by high mountains. If the sun is not high up, the tank map is mostly in the shade, which makes spotting tanks a lot harder because it's darker. You really notice a difference on this map if you fly around noon or on the afternoon with the sun lower. Of course, you could argue that I fly pretty fast in my attack runs and that you can fly slower, with the engine cut and flaps all the way out to get more time to aim. But there's a reason why I don't do that. 3 as a matter of fact. First, if you get too slow and close to the stall speed, the plane becomes unstable and harder to aim. Also, if I get attacked by an enemy fighter, I want to have enough speed to have at least some options left. And third, the enemy anti-aircraft guns will have a very easy time shooting me if you fly too slow. Now, in the case of this test, that would not have mattered because I knew they had no fighters left, and the Russians don't have a AAA tank yet. But that won't stay that way, and I want to fly the way I most likely would when the game goes live, and by that time they will have a AAA tank. So, to sum the strafing run test up, so far I would say it looks pretty balanced. It is not too easy to spot enemy tanks in time, and you need to aim well. Of course, we will have planes with heavier cannons further up the tech tree, but the tank armor is increasing as well, and of course later planes like the Era Cobra or 9T are faster than the 112, so we'll have even less time to fire. Now let's take a look at bombing. I've flown mostly the Stuka B in this test, so let's talk about dive bombers in the closed beta test. As far as visibility goes, it is of course similar to the strafing runs. Enemy tanks are not that often highlighted, and if they are not, you have to look closely to find them. And of course, this is realistic battles, with no or at least a limited respawn, so you can't just go for the spawn points and be sure to find targets like in arcade. The capture points often give the position of tanks away, and I think they should be bigger to allow capping tanks to spread out more. But the maps we play at the moment are of course arcade maps, and the capture point domination mode is an arcade game mode, which we will most likely not see in the finished realistic battle mode. As far as firepower goes, the bombs are of course a lot more dangerous, and a close hit will often destroy a tank. However, the amount of bombs you carry is limited. In the case of my Stuka, I can carry only one. After I drop it, I have to return to the airfield to get a new one. On Ash River, I noticed I have about enough time to get one new bomb and drop it before the match ends, so I usually get 2 bombs off during a match on this map. Less if I'm forced to drop one to deal with a fighter as in this footage. Later Stukas get a few more bombs, but again the tanks get more armor later on too, and usually you only get enough for 2 drops. And of course, as a dive bomber, the Stuka does not get a bomb sight, so you actually have to do a somewhat proper dive bombing attack to get a hit. So as far as dive bombers go, I also think they are fair in their current form in realistic battles. They have to aim their bombs properly and they get a very small amount of them. Also, most dive bombers in the game are somewhat slow and fragile. That is especially true for the Stuka. Now let's talk about level bombers, and here I have to say I see a few balancing problems. Twin engine horizontal bombers do get the bomb crosshair even in realistic battles, and that's a problem in my opinion. I think it was already a problem even before the closed beta test. First, because a huge crosshair projected onto the ground simply has no place in realistic battle mode. That's how bomb aiming works in Ace Combat. I can accept it in arcade mode, but not in realistic battles. And second, because it is unfair towards dive bombers which have to aim manually, the way they should. In reality, the advantage of dive bombers like the Stuka was that it could deliver its payload a lot more precise than a horizontal bomber. As a trade-off, the dive bomber carries fewer bombs. In Warthunder, in realistic battle mode, this is different. Thanks to the perfectly accurate bombing crosshair, the horizontal bomber is no less accurate than a dive bomber, and it does not even have to do any kind of fancy dive bombing. So how come that the dive bomber pilots have to do extra work for no benefit? So, ground forces or not, I think this bomb aiming crosshair that is projected on the ground needs to go. With the ground forces it presents a real balancing problem, because it makes horizontal bombers so accurate that they can drop a single bomb on one target. Dropping one bomb alone is something most of those planes could not even do in reality. Now, with the large amount of bombs they carry, that means they can take out a lot of player-controlled tanks before they have to go and rearm. And they can do it from third person and level flight. So I think here the third person crosshair has to be removed. The normal bomb sight is by far good enough. And when this is done, well, we will see how it works then. So that is my preliminary opinion on ground versus air balance in realistic battles. I think strafing and dive bombing works fine, but horizontal bombers need a few adjustments. Overall, I would say the balancing looks good in realistic battle mode, unlike arcade. In arcade there is some more work needed, especially the extremely fast bomb reloads present a problem. But I let arcade players discuss this. Well, this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was enjoyable, thanks for watching and maybe I'll see you next time.